Hey everybody, welcome to the show. My name is Jesse Williams. If you're not familiar with me, I host the podcast Racing on the Rocks, where we cover everything from Ultra 4, full-size bouncers, UTV racing, and RC everything. Whether it's racers, manufacturers, or just people of interest, the show is awesome and I'm really glad that you're here to learn about something new today because let me tell you, it's cool.
Get a drink and gather round. Let's talk drivers. Let's talk rigs. Let's talk skill. You've got the best of the best in the off-road racing world. Have a seat at the table with us and let's talk about racing on the rocks.
Here it is. The Axial RBX10 rock bouncer. It has finally landed. What we've been asking for years has finally come to fruition, and let me tell you guys, I couldn't be more excited about this particular car. There's so much here. I'm gonna let you guys have a quick 360, and we're gonna break this down, starting from the outside going in, and we're gonna go all the way through this car right now. So the first thing let's talk about is these TSL siped boggers. Now, if you're a fan of rock bouncing or if you're a fan of off-roading in general, at some point or another, you have seen the fact that these rock bouncer guys, not only do they run huge 43, 54 inch tall tires, giant tires that are super wide, 14, 15 inches wide, they also do some retreading on the tires to give them more traction in a variety of different terrains. What's really cool is the guys at Axial have retreaded a TSL bogger to be one of the craziest tread patterns I've seen. Now, I've seen this tread pattern once in real life on a real full-size buggy, and it was extremely effective then. So Axial has saved you guys a bunch of work in trying to get all your tires cut up the way they look. This is a one-to-one bouncer setup. But let me tell you guys one thing real quick. These tires are the biggest tires that Axial has ever made from the factory, and they're huge not only height-wise, but they're also extremely wide. So these tires, I've been really pleased with them so far. This really is just right out of the box for me. I've had maybe 4 or 5 minutes of run time on it, just around my driveway to make sure that everything worked and I didn't need anything else. These tires are going to be great for rock bouncing for a couple of different reasons, and trail riding as well. So let me go ahead and just show you this. The tires themselves, they are particularly soft in the sidewalls. So what you're going to be able to do, as you can see there, is they'll actually conform quite well to the terrain that you're on, but the rubber choice that they've chosen to go with on the actual lug itself gives you that wonderful rubber grabbing sound. Now, why is that important? Because I flipped this thing on its lid and I held the gas as hard as I could. There was not major ballooning by any means. It is a wide and square structured tire. Now what that does is it prevents the ballooning of the tires, but it also gives you an extremely wide surface to grab from. The side lugs on these tires are huge. I think that you can get a really great look here where you can see that all of these lugs here, they're very soft. It's very flexible. The entire tire carcass is strong, but at the same time, there's plenty of sidewall grab and there's plenty of movement down here in the tire itself and with the stock foams as well. I think that this is going to be a really great tire. You're going to be able to use the width and the lightness of the tire to float over dirt, float over the obstacles, but at the same token, as soon as you start to dig down in the ground, you're going to find a lot of traction with these tires. Now, first thing you probably noticed outside of the wonderfully orange chassis is we have some new axles here. And these axles are not your regular AR60s. What they are, in fact, is they're a 14-bolt replica. Now, the RBX10 Ryft is a four-wheel drive engineering to carry a lot of power. And if you're a fan of one-to-one rock bouncing, you know that all the guys that run 14 bolts in the rear are the guys that run the most power. So we're seeing some really nice scale improvements from the AR60. What is included in the change from the AR60 is the truss and servo setup. So it does look a little bit different. We now have a servo mounted actually down onto the axle, And what you can see here, I'm going to try and keep this in view here, is that there's a kind of like a clamp system that's built into the axle that actually is going to hold the servo onto the axle. Now what you can see from the back here is that the axle actually has the servo leaned a little bit backwards. Now what this does and why this was done this way was because up travel, if you can't see here, this car on the chassis is really well designed, and they were concerned about up travel through this area. You know, in a typical AR60 axle, if you were to smash it down, you would probably be hitting the top of the servo right about there. But what's so beautiful about the design, when they leaned that servo back just a little bit, you get all the way down to the suspension travel, and you still got a little left to go before you even make contact with that servo. So there is also, and I believe there will be an option part for a caster adjustment possibly, but what leaning that servo back does is it also allows you, as you go to turn the tires, you can actually use more of the sidewall to grab on. It's just a strategy thing, and it's all dependent on how you build your car and where you put those C-hubs. Now, going back as the ready-to-run car, this car comes loaded with the S614 servo. It's a Spektrum servo. It's very fast. It's been reliable, again, for my use here in the driveway or so. I did kind of run it around, hit some jumps, things like that, and obviously it's still working in great shape. So I'm curious to see how long that will last. One thing that is brand new to this car, and I'm excited to see, is this nice little piece of plastic right here. What that piece of plastic is it is the Axial Servo Saver. Now it's a little different from your standard Axial Servo Saver because let's see if I can show you here. It's actually a double shear on the pivot ball right there, and what's inside that setup there is some steel bands that actually move and give and break in the event that it saves your servo. So that's a new piece of technology coming out with these 14-bolt axles. I'm very, very excited to see Axial trying to make some, conservative moves so that you don't go outside and just blow pieces and parts like crazy. So let me tell you guys about that though. This car, fit, finish, and all together is much tighter and much more clean than any vehicle I've seen from Axial, Losi, or any of the other competitors before. In fact, if you're a Losi fan, you've probably already noticed that there is some carryover from Losi itself. One thing you might have noticed at this point is that there is nice rotors with brakes added on. Let's see if I can get you a good image of that. Actually, in the wheels there's a good example. You can actually see that they have scaled brake discs and rotors there as well. This car is a 4-link in the front and trailing arm setup in the rear, essentially just saying that the shock connects to the lower link rather than axle mounted in the back. And in the front, the axle actually will connect down to the shock, or down to a shock mount on the axle. Some things that I think are really cool and worth noting while we're in here is these knuckle setups. The knuckle and C setup is quite different than what it used to be. It's actually all double sheared, really reinforced, and it's a harder plastic than what we're used to seeing with Axial. Let's see if I can get a good look here for you guys. It's a harder plastic than what we're used to seeing, but more than anything, the fit and quality finish of those parts all going together is really something special. And I don't mean that lightly. I really do mean that everything is tucked up in there and inside that knuckle. Let's see if I can figure out a way to get this on camera here. Everything inside that knuckle is very, very tight and very, very snug. Should be a lot stronger, should flow a lot better, parts fit better. It seems to be a really well put together car. So as you can see, we have our steel links up front, front or lower and above. And the next really cool thing is the new WB11 drive shafts. Now something that notoriously goes wrong if you run high horsepower is the old style of drive shafts. You would just brake at the yoke and everything would just kind of, the drive shaft itself may spin or it may twist and spin. I really strongly don't think you're going to have that issue anymore. What has been upgraded is all of the drive shafts in this car have been upgraded to the WB11 style with a U-joint or universal joint built right into the car. So as you can see there's aftermarket designs that mimic this, but I can tell you that this is going to be a substantial upgrade from the standard Axial setup. It's really, really great. To finish off the drivetrain and talk before we start talking about transmission in this car, the front differential, rear differential, and there is a center differential in this car. Ready to run, they are all three open. And they all three come with 1 million weight diff fluid in all of it. Now you're probably asking yourself, what does that mean? So essentially, if you look here at these front wheels, if I turn the wheel closest to me, you see that the wheels are actually not locked together. It's an open differential style wheel. And if you also notice, if you turn the front wheel, the rear wheels are not spinning either. So essentially, these two wheels are going to operate different of each other, and the front and the rear are going to operate independently of each other as well. Same thing for the rear, they're open differential in the rear. So that being said, they'll spin opposite directions. Now, what does that mean when it comes to drivability? It means that you don't have a spool front and rear, so these are you're not always going to have four-wheel drive. Now, when I talked to Axial about this, I actually mentioned, before I had gotten it on my car, they mentioned that to me that they were going to run 1 million weight in all of the differentials. Interesting move, but I think it's going to work in a lot of people's favor. And I say that because the way that these cars work, especially in particular with the AR60s and the rock bouncers that are being custom made out there today, is that when everything is in four-wheel drive all the time, a lot of times the front doesn't steer very good, and also the back end ends up pushing the front far more than you'd like. It kind of generates a really poor turning experience, but also a little bit of unpredictability in the driving experience. Whenever you come down, say for example you come off a ledge, everything loads down on, and as soon as you hit the gas, all four wheels are locked and spinning, and it does something unpredictable. What this does in having that 1 million weight diff fluid is it actually is going to build a buffer in there. So when you crank everything down and one wheel is stuck and the other's not, you'll actually spin all the other wheels but the one that's stuck, and it will give you a more steady, more planted feel, and then as soon as the rest of the car gains traction and everybody gets together, it'll all start spinning together. That's the theory behind it. We'll see how it actually works. So in the differentials, like I said, we have 1 million weight diff fluid. We'll see how that decision turns out. I'm hopeful for it. I think that there's a lot of guys who are in the competition series for these custom-made cars, and they run that and they seem to have some good success. Now, next is the transmission setup. This is going to be a new transmission and transfer case style. I'll have a link to this picture, or I'll throw it at the end of the video. It is different than anything Axial has done before, and I think that it's really unique. It does a good job because what it actually is doing is putting the power back into a transfer case so that you get both a driver side drop on both sides. Now, what that means is just that on the bottom side here, you'll have the actual transmission motor set up over here, and the transfer case is on this side, giving you both drive shafts coming from one side. Now, that's scale. A lot of guys in the bouncer world do it. It's basically like running a straight line of parts. Now, I can tell you because I have had discussions with Axial, and once you get this car in your hands, that you'll understand what I mean. This transmission and center section is completely overbuilt. I think that it is plenty strong to get you through whatever you need. This is, again, the finish, quality, and piecement of everything together here really is something special. That'll give you a better look right there into what the transmission style actually is. You can see, I think you might be able to see here, that's the actual transfer case, whereas the transmission is this nice orange shell, and the motor is hooked up to the front, which you can very vaguely see through that front gate right up here. Is where your motor is. So everything is nice and snug in there. It is going to be a battle for real estate in there, especially after you put your aftermarket solutions in there. So one thing we should talk about is the chassis itself. This is a chassis designed by Axial, and it looks great. When you see it, you know rock bouncer. Now, one thing I wanted to do was I wanted to show you guys, obviously, the side with the panel that says the RBX10 Ryft rock bouncing car from Axial. The panels look great, a nice blue, purplish, orange color that goes perfectly with this chassis color. It really is great, and our little dudes inside here, the interior looks great. We have speedometers and we have a co-driver. It looks great. Now, some guys will run it with panels. Some guys will choose to not run it with panels. Just depends on how you look. Because what you could see is it's actually pretty finished all the way through here. It looks like a rock bouncer. It looks good. Even if you were to paint your hardware, it would look even more seamless. But I do know that some guys like the open style rock bouncer. So that is always an option by just taking your panels off. So moving on. The shocks on this car are big. Let me tell you that. The rear shocks are, quite honestly, the longest shocks I think I've seen on an RC vehicle. I think they're measuring just over 120 millimeters, possibly 120 millimeters. I haven't had an exact measurement on there. I do know that all 4 shocks are aluminum body, and they do come with 30 weight oil in all 4 corners, and it gives you a very nice plush ride. I believe that everything is sprung pretty well from the factory. The front end feels good, the rear end feels nice and responsive. This looks good. So far, so good. No leaks, nothing like that. Everything looks good on the shocks. This is a great car, you guys. One thing that they've done that I really appreciated is they got all the weight forward that they could. Now what I want to do is I'm just going to show you the front end here. First off, the front end looks great, and your receiver box is just behind the front axle. Everything looks good from this end, and you can see that everything you need is going to be tucked nicely behind the skid plate. But what they've done is they put the battery carrier up in the front of the vehicle. It seems like they've learned from the Ryft and from the Bomber and all those different things. But what they've allowed you to do is run a lot of weight up here. Up in this front cargo section, there's a lot of space. Now, there's 2 hairpin clips here that just pop open the hood. I'm a huge fan of this because now you can run a huge battery in here, or if you want to run a shorty pack and you want to just put some weight on the nose, definitely doable. There's a lot of room for customization here. This goes up and down very easily, and in fact, I really appreciate that the entire basically hood, the whole front end top of this car comes off. It makes it very easy to get to what you need to. Let me show you that one more time here. And then obviously this is going to come with a Spektrum Smart 130 amp brushless ESC with the IC smart system and the connectors. The electronics in this system as well are a 22 kilovolt 4-pole brushless system from Spektrum. Plenty of power, you guys. Let me tell you, I've run this. It is 3S and 4S compatible. I have run this on 3S, and it is plenty of power. I think that if you put 4S in this thing, you better be ready to drag race because it is a beast of a car. It is a lot of power very quickly. I was on the phone with Randall. I was on the phone with the guys from Axial, and I told them you could basically sit at the bottom of a hill, pull the trigger, and shoot it to the top. It's really a lot of power, and the ESC has been programmed to be a ton of power just right from the get, a lot like you'd see in a scale rock bouncer, or excuse me, a 1-to-1 rock bouncer. Overall opinions, we do have glue-on wheels for the Raceline wheels here on this car. I don't think particularly will be an option. I'm excited to see what I can do with this car. Right out of the box, this car seems very capable. One thing that I will add before I do anything is I'm going to get a rear sway bar set up in here. If I haven't mentioned it, there's multiple locations for mounting here, but there's a sway bar mount right here. That little square right there is actually where the sway bar mount is. I'm not sure if I'm going to put the sway bar there. I bet you I probably won't. And that's just because these holes here, they're actually a little bit bigger than the regular sway bar, and even a Vanquish sway bar with the particular golden, the brass end that's on the Vanquish doesn't fit. So gonna have to do something a little custom. I've got something in mind involving the rear of the chassis to keep all the chassis the same, and then have a sway bar in the back. I think that that'll fix it. a lot of tunability in this car, whether it comes to springs, shocks, shock location, or what have you. This is a great car, and I'm very, very excited to build it. And today was just to get it out in the open. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to let me know. And thank you, Axial, for letting me get a car as soon as possible. And we're going to get this all sorted out and built for you guys. And you guys can just take the easy route and take our trials and errors, and you guys can have an awesome car right out of the box. So if you're not already, subscribe to the channel. If you would like to follow the show on the podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, Alexa Play, wherever you can find a podcast, we're there. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. This is going to be a great car. Please stay tuned, subscribe to the channel, because we're going to be building this car in a couple of different steps and series, and I'm very confident that this is going to be a fun car. Thanks, everybody.